All right, nerds. I have a special show for you today. I was on Twitter very actively advocating for Dean Phillips in the Democratic primary. And not surprisingly, there were a lot of Biden supporters who disagreed with me. Many of them were really animated and very angry. And at one point, I just said, hey, it's hard to have a debate over memes. Like, could any of you or any Biden supporter come on to the Nerds for Humanity live stream and let's just talk it out, and not necessarily, to convince each other or change each other's minds. I mean, if that's always possible, but just to kind of understand each other's perspectives. And so I have a anonymous Twitter user who was not one of the people who were very like shouty, but this person said, "Hey, look, I'll come on and have a discussion with you." So I'll call you Anon. Anon, welcome to the show, and hello, nerds.
Hello, I'm glad to be here.
So with what you can, maybe we'll just start with a little bit of your background, as much as you're willing to share, and who you're supporting in the primary, and then we can go from there.
Yeah, so just kind of as like kind of a disclosure, so I work in the DC area. So I work for a nonprofit group, um, and that does have ties to like kind of more tangential ties to kind of the DC politics. We do a little bit of kind of lobbying work, but these are my own opinions, and our nonprofit work is nonpartisan.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not like we don't have Republicans doing kind of Republicans in our workforce or anything like that. So this is my own perspective. So kind of my perspective is really coming from someone who's like really kind of more connected to politics and kind of how things kind of operate. Since kind of like I work under a nonprofit who does lobby. Um, so there is that. So that's my perspective. So think of it what you will. I'm not. So I mean, I'm not some person just kind of far out, like in Oregon or something, who has no connections to politics whatsoever. But I also don't have any connections to like the Biden administration or anything like that.
Yeah. Well, thanks for the context. And so you literally work inside the Beltway, as they say?
Correct.
Oh, cool, excellent. Well, for those of you who don't know, I'm joining from the other side of the country in Northern California, far from the Beltway. And but tell me a little bit about how you're kind of observing this cycle, and how where you're leaning, or if you've already decided in terms of who you're supporting for
Yeah.
president.
So I'm clear here. I'm supporting Biden. I'm not here to be like like a precise like super staunch like Biden does nothing wrong. That's absolutely not the case. Really, my position for Biden is just coming from an from pragmatism, how politics works, his accomplishments, records, and kind of the nature of like why Democrats or a lot of people, a lot of regular folk support Biden over any other alternative. Um, so I'm not here like Biden does everything right. No president does. But I think he's done a lot of things that warrant a lot of credit. Um, and there's and I honestly think the election results relative to the kind of the partisan lean have really demonstrated that. Kind of in defiance of the polls, which I do express skepticism on to a fair degree, um, especially presidential polling. So that's sort of like kind of where I'm positioned. So I don't view Dean like if Biden, let's say, I don't I don't see anything like wrong with Biden running for president. And if, let's say, in a circumstance he doesn't choose to run, like, let's say he actually does have like a health issue, like, I know, not something simple as like gaps or memory lapses, which is, let's be frank, if you're talking to politicians, they actually gaffe a lot more than Biden. Like, people don't realize mixing up Mexico and Egypt is way more common than you think. Or not specifically those two, but mixing up things, mixing up words, mixing up things. It's quite common with anyone you talk to. But like, let's say you actually had like a serious, health issue, someone step down. I personally think that candidate is not. I think it's Kamala Harris for a couple of institutional reasons, as well as the base of the party and where Biden's support derives from, and then why Kamala Harris is actually the better alternative. I still think Biden's the top choice, but like, if something happens to Biden, Kamala should be the replacement, not Dean Phillips. So that's kind of where a lot of my criticisms of Biden don't warrant me supporting someone else. If something happens to him, Kamala Harris, I think, is underappreciated, underrated, and brings together key parts of the Democratic coalition that Dean Phillips cannot, or Dean Phillips would lose.
Yeah, now let me ask you this question. If we were hiring for, our day jobs, we would look at the person's resume, like their accomplishments, in which case I think Biden would have a very strong resume. It would be like, wow,
Right.
Inflation Reduction Act, CHIPS Act, COVID vaccinations, economic recovery. There's a lot to be excited about in terms of what he got done. The other part of it would also be a job interview, usually an interview with multiple people on the team. And I think many of us have all seen scenarios in our work lives where a great resume is kind of necessary but not sufficient, especially if it's a senior leadership role. And in this case, that would qualify. What's your read on, when you see him speak and engage kind of off the cuff and, take reporter questions? Like, are you feeling like, how do you feel about his readiness to compete in November and also lead us through like the next crisis in 2028?
Mm-hmm. So a couple of things. So in terms of that, you can clearly tell he's old. There's absolutely no denying that. But I don't see really any indications of him actually being kind of more mentally different than he has in the past. He's just a lot slower. Like, gaffes for Biden are actually quite common. And if you've ever interacted with politicians on the down low, they mix up things a lot. They slip things a lot. And let's be frank, most of us do the same thing. And I honestly think that it's the disproportionality of the media coverage that kind of gets to me. Like, you have something like, Trump, right? Telling people like pretty insane stuff, like right here, let's say on Truth Social, and you never hear about it on the news. But Biden, has a press conference and makes some really important points and kind of makes a subtle reversion kind of on his positions on like Israel's handling of Gaza, right? And that gets completely dismissed for a single mix-up, Egypt and Mexico, when just like a few days ago, Mike Johnson mixed up Iran and Israel, or I forget what Jesse Watterson mixed up the South Carolina, North Dakota. These are so these aren't old people, right? But both of them had gaffes, and people slip up and say the wrong things, type the wrong things. So I think people see Biden's kind of a little bit slowness, and he's clearly visibly old, and any gaffe that would have been dismissed by someone younger gets amplified kind of in the media just because he has an appearance of being older, even though Trump is like a couple years younger, says far more heinous, despicable, and plainly wrong and kind of deranged stuff. And you can clearly see the disproportionality of the coverage on that. You see a lot less coverage on, like, you can see like New York Times, like they put like 7, like 8 or articles on like just a mix up between, based on the premise of mixing up the words. Whereas, there's the Eugene Carroll case, and that was like a couple of articles at best. And then this involved a rape case right here. So like, or Access Hollywood a few years ago, that was a disproportionately less covered than emails when it comes to Hillary. So, and I think part of the reason is like, kind of, if you're in the media system, kind of what's happening to the journalism industry and kind of the financial problems they're having right now. So they're having there's layoffs happening. A lot of people I know are getting fired. Companies are downsizing. There's a reason for that, and it's because Biden doesn't sell.
I hear
Like,
your point, Anon, that gaffes are not exclusive to Biden, and for sure, I mean, I acknowledge and am equally disturbed by Trump mixing up Haley and Pelosi, or
no, it's not just that. Like, it's mixed. I mean, it's not necessarily wrong that maybe Trump is mixing up these things either. I think those mix-ups happen repetitively, but it's the thing. It's not just that, but he's saying like legitimately deranged stuff
oh yeah,
that are
yeah, yeah.
getting far less coverage than Biden mixing up Mexico and Egypt.
Yeah, yeah. So if anybody's suggesting that somehow Biden would be less dangerous than Trump, that is not my position.
No. But
I,
what I'm saying is Biden's faults do not warrant kind of the heightened amount of media criticism around him relative to his accomplishments, his orbit, and his advisors. I mean, remember, he's not just a single team. Like, this is an administration. And there's only like a couple of people you could kind of criticize within the administration. They've otherwise kept a fairly tight ship. So, there's also an important thing, right? It's kind of interesting, like when you hear Republicans talk about Biden, like you always notice that they never cite their own experiences, right? Like when the media storm, they harped on it, but they notice how they only mentioned the press coverage. You never hear Republicans in private and in leaks talk that Biden is out of step, right? You don't hear Kevin McCarthy, all the leaks from Kevin McCarthy's team about Biden do not suggest he's out of step. He clearly knew how to push McCarthy when it came to the debt limit deal. The debt limit deal that Biden got was far better and far less, had far less concessions than Obama did when he was kind of dealing with the Republican Congress. So that's a clear difference in skill and competence compared from Obama to Biden, despite Biden's age. Republicans in private do not say that Biden is out of step. If that was the case, there would be a lot more leaks coming out. Like, Republicans have a serious incentive to privately leak things. So
here's my argument about what you're saying is unfair coverage of Biden's stumbles. I hear you that it's not unprecedented for a politician to have some gaffes. I do think that it is unprecedented for a politician running for president to be this old.
Correct.
And I believe his team, I'm not sure who it is, maybe it's Jill, maybe it's his team, maybe it's himself, they have not gone out of their way to refute these concerns by kind of putting him out there more often. So in your example of, hey, Trump says a lot of crazy stuff, he makes gas, he says ridiculous things that are shocking. The thing that you cannot say about Trump is that he's hiding or not accessible or isn't showing energy. He shows a lot of energy. He shows a lot of fight. He's lost a little bit of his fastball too, but at least he's out there. He's speaking off the cuff. Whereas for Biden, people were saying to me on Twitter, why are you giving him so much grief? He did a press conference yesterday. Isn't that enough? It's like, well, that was like 9 minutes long. And frankly, like he lost his temper, was like shouting at the CNN reporter, misunderstanding her question. That doesn't inspire confidence. I had another Biden supporter on a couple weeks ago, maybe last week, and he was saying, Dean Phillips doesn't do a good job earning trust. And what I said was like, I don't think Biden's earning a lot of trust for people who are swing voters and have legitimate concerns. Do you anticipate like this kind of sequestering to persist? Like, couldn't he just like refute a lot of these concerns and assuage people's fears by
Well,
just doing some, like, no Super Bowl interview, no town hall,
so the couple of the things I've kind of been hearing a little bit are that a lot of the strategy is revolved around Biden getting more as after the convention and as the election draws near, because kind of the logic with this is the fast pace of the media cycle. So what we're talking about here is, like, let's say Biden does a press conference, and then he does another press conference, another press conference. These media cycles have accelerated in the past couple of years. So like a news story does not retain the longevity it does. So basically, the media value of a press conference now is significantly diminished because, like, if there's a gap between it, anything that happens in between, like a small slip up, will get almost the same amount of coverage as the press conference he did prior. Like, there's the disproportionality of that, and the fast cycle means people kind of forget about the press con. And we're talking about like kind of average people. Like, people quickly forget about the last cycle that happened. So the idea is to concentrate your media cycle as much so that way as possible to control the narrative, because it's just not realistic for a president to have month after month of town hall, whereas it makes sense to have like 7 or 8 town halls towards the end. Focus all your energy on that. That way, the media cycle is at least maximized towards that, and you minimize the cycle of the gas, because people forget quite a lot. And like, and there's always like a gaffe gets the same amount of coverage as the Chips Act. Let's be frank here. Like it really did. So like, and there's thousands of students, there's lots of people saying, oh, why didn't Biden forgive student loans, when clearly he did. So it's not like those press releases didn't happen, those news coverage, but clearly people forgot, right? That's the rapidity of the news cycle. And keep in mind, this is important. Not that many people actually watch town halls. Not many people actually watch the news. Not many people actually read the articles. Like 80% of people read the title and read like a 10-second clip. And the 10-second clip of a gaffe gets far more news and media cycle, and it circulates far more in social media than a press conference does or a town hall does. Like, there, you could clearly see the rapid decline of the viewership of the Fox News debates. It was like not just like a linear decline; it was like exponential. The first one had there, but it just rapidly declined, because as soon as it just becomes uninteresting, people don't watch anymore. As soon as it became uncompetitive, people don't watch, and Biden's policies are not interesting. They don't drive a media cycle.
I
So
think
doing a town hall is something people will not watch the entirety of. Only highly engaged partisans will, and that's not a persuasive point.
Anon, what do you say about the Biden team declining to take an interview before the Super Bowl? That would have been millions of people. I think they would have tuned in.
The reason why is there is from what I'm hearing, like, for example, we're not getting a lot of work right now because they're doing some sort of back work. I suspect it's foreign policy related. So I think the last year there's also a conflict schedule too.
Yeah.
Because
How
so because
inconvenient.
Right. So like, you also have to consider this man is the president. Like, it's not implausible. Why did he skip it last year versus this year? I mean, there are calendar schedules. things like that. And right now the Middle East is kind of in a hot water, and so I know I've been hearing they've, in terms of the nonprofit work I'm doing, it's been down specifically these last few weeks, and I suspect there's a reason for that. And so I suspect that's also correlated to why, there's not a Super Bowl interview happening this year. So there's also the realism that, that he can't make everything, and sometimes it just makes sense to prioritize certain schedules. And I, I would be like hella stressed out if, like, after the DNC convention, Biden wasn't ramping up the media's interviews, because that's when it becomes more effective, and that's when you can block out the schedule. Because that's also when we our team also gets zero response from well, I guess Congress as well. So there is that. Yeah.
Here's the predicament I'm in. Maybe you can talk me down from this. I absolutely do not want to see Donald Trump back in the White House.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's a non-starter for me. I will even take a Biden over a Trump. And I did that in 2020 when I was led to believe, maybe I was stupid, but I was led to believe it was going to be a one-term transitional deal. So he was my fifth choice in the primaries, but I was like, okay, fine. Like, I don't want Trump. So I still don't want Trump, but I have real concerns about when we do this big reveal in the fall, when we finally get to see more of Biden, that he underperforms. And for me, it's like, if I'm going to buy a car with a lot of mileage on it, like, I want to test drive that thing a couple times, not after the convention.
Right.
So how do you help me? Because, like, this is very
yeah, that is true. That is an absolute concern. If it's not landing well, like, the big, my suspicion is going to be a big media ramp up, just to consolidate and prevent the cycles from going too fast, because that's how it is. But the thing I see here is just the alternative is not compelling, to be frank. I personally see Dean Phillips as far less popular within the Democratic coalition than Kamala Harris is. That's just the situation I see. There isn't a compelling alternative. Like, maybe if Whitmer ran, maybe if Newsom ran, maybe there'd be some way to piece together enough of the coalition. But I just don't see Dean Phillips as, like, I don't see, Democratic voters as compelled by Dean Phillips. Then maybe they're not, like, super enthused with Kamala Harris, but I think they like Kamala Harris more than Dean Phillips. So that's also
like Harris more than Whitmer.
So that's sort of the mystery here. But at the same time, like, is that worth a topic of discussion? Because she's not running, right? She's the Biden campaign co-chair. So it's clear what her position is, because your argument here is also primarily to vote for Dean. But my argument is, like, I don't see the Democratic base being, because there's also the fact that, like, the core of the Democratic base is the black electorate. So there is, and maybe it was a flawed move for Biden to pick Kamala Harris, but bypassing Kamala Harris is just not going to happen. So, like, the black electorate is key to the Biden presidency, and skipping a black woman is just not tenable. There is an identity politics situation that you have to account for. Whitmer would probably do well in that, but I don't think Dean Phillips. I think Dean Phillips would actually have a lower turnout amongst black voters than Biden will, and that's a big problem. That's my central. That's like that's an essential part of the party that does care to some extent about identity politics, and also bypassing Kamala Harris just does not bode well. There is a core contingent, and I don't think and her underperformance to Biden is within a margin of error. And also, I do not believe, let's say Dean Phillips becomes the presidential nominee, I do not believe the media cycle is going to be kind to him either. I think the power of because it would just knock him down and lesser enthusiasm among certain sets of the party as well. Like, don't underestimate Fox News in terms of how to knock down a candidate. Like, Obama had one of the largest, had a landslide election. 2 years later, one of the biggest red waves in history. Yet he still got elected. And then there was another red wave. Obama was rhetorically popular, yet it still did not save him from political destruction down the ballot. And I don't think Dean Phillips could really enthusiast. And I really don't think Dean Phillips could really overcome a polling differential. I honestly think, let's say Dean Phillips comes, he'll come back to Biden's polling numbers. There isn't any evidence to show that.
Let me respond to that. So here's my argument. Our objective is we must prevent Trump from re-entering the White House. Mm-hmm. So we have a shared goal of fielding a candidate who can win in November. Mm-hmm. I have, and I think 70% of Americans have concerns about a Trump versus Biden matchup, and a majority of Democrats list Biden's age as a concern. Mm-hmm. Therefore, for me, it's like, oh, well, the logical thing to do is to consider alternatives. I am not saying everyone should immediately switch from Biden to Dean. I would love that. I mean, he's the only one that's running in the primary at this time. But I do see a scenario where you're asking like, hey, Whitmer, that's not really realistic. She's a co-chair. There is a scenario where, let's say Biden does a town hall in Michigan before the Michigan primary, or does some long interview before Super Tuesday, and it becomes clear, not just to the public, but to Biden, that he's not going to be in a good position in November. And he and Jill decide like it is time to pass the torch. Why wouldn't then a open discussion be the next logical step, of which Dean would be on a list, but so would Newsom and Whitmer and
yeah, actually that changes my calculus completely, right? Like then we could talk like a brokering convention, Whitmer. Mm-hmm. But what I'm saying is Dean Phillips would not be that person. Whitmer would probably be a more compelling candidate, Black Recklet. So what I'm saying is, unless that happens, there is no point in pushing, because ultimately I don't think, like, Dean's initial strategy was kind of get into the primary, start a discussion, peel away votes in the primaries, and kind of make the Democratic Party or the Democratic electorate maybe question an alternative, whether it's him or not. But I honestly don't see that happening, because Dean hasn't been, I don't know, it has not really attracted. There's also a difference between revealed and stated preferences, right? Like, so a lot of people forgot, RFK Jr. ran in the Democratic primary, mm-hmm. right? This was months ago, before any primary started. But the thing is, what happened was, as more and more people got to know RFK Jr. within the party, like, he actually had pretty good approvals within the Democratic primary. But as more and more people started to learn about him, and that his last name benefit started to diminish, he became less and less popular within the party. And that's the real reason why he dropped out from the Democratic primary. And honestly, I think a less extreme situation of what's happening is kind of happening a little bit to Dean Phillips, right? Like, Dean Phillips, I think you can kind of see, like, I mean, these, when you're seeing on Twitter, I mean, these aren't like in a representative group, but it's also quite clear that, like, you can we're sensing hostility build up. There's a difference between revealed and stated preferences in polls. So that's also important to consider, right? Like, when people talk, when you see poll like second choice, after Biden, the plurality choice is Kamala Harris, not Whitmer. So that's sort of also a contention here. And also, yeah, there's a difference between revealed and stated. There's a big difference between, I have concerns about Biden's age and I won't vote for Biden. There's a difference between let's have an alternative, and I actually like the alternative. This is like the same, if you like, if you ask like your kid or something, hey, do you want to eat this or this, or or you give the people a couple of choices, and then they say, oh, you guys choose, and then you pick one, and then they say no. Like that's honestly the psychological point. Like when you give people an alternative, the the Democratic electorate has really not shown that they actually like. There's a big difference between concern and what they're actually revealing. The turnouts have been small in the primaries, but there's no, if the concern was such that they would be defecting, that has not presented itself in these primaries.
Yeah, I think a lot of the Biden supporters who have this hostility toward Dean are, I think, and I know I'm going to draw some heat for this, but I think they're missing the forest from the trees. It's like, okay, if we have a car that we're going to take a long road trip on, and many of us have concerns if this car has enough gas and if there's enough, tread left on the tires to last 4 more years. And then we say like, okay, well, let's look at our alternatives. Here's another car. And everybody's like, well, that car is even worse. That doesn't mean you go in the original car. That means like, okay, well, let's look at all of our options. And
I
so
mean,
this
what
whole
what I'm
like,
seeing here, what I'm really seeing here in like second place polling and the preferences of the primary electorate, because this is what we have to deal with here, is it's Kamala is the second place. People will prefer Kamala over Dean because Dean is seen as the worst car. Kamala is maybe to some people is a better car than Biden's, and some say it's a slightly worse car. But a lot of people they're ignoring the small two-seater vehicle off to the side because it's just not compelling. It's
and
not
if they were
enthusiastic.
offered a choice of Newsom and Whitmer and Pritzker, you think they would still pick Kamala?
That's kind of the question. So that's the mystery. We don't really know because like right now Kamala's getting around like 30-ish%, whereas all the others are like in single digits. So we don't know how the undecided go, right? Like when you see
Well, we
polls
do
of
know
second,
that Kamala wasn't preferred in the last primary, right?
correct.
We know that her favorability rating is lower than Biden's.
Mm-hmm.
So all I'm
What I,
saying is the solution to me is Biden does a 90-minute town hall, a 60 minutes interview. He
mm-hmm.
just completely takes the age thing off the table. I think
But
I
that's the thing.
honestly
But
would
that's
be
the thing
fine with
here. That's the thing here. That's going to happen a lot sooner. And also, it's not like he has done a 60 minutes interview. That's happened a few months ago. Like there are interviews last year that he did. He's not changed that much from one year to the other, but everyone's forgotten about those, haven't they?
Well, because
He did
there's a
several last year.
presidential election. Like you can't run on, the
No,
job
no,
you
right.
had
But
ago.
that's the calculus that's happened, right? Like Biden did all these interviews and stuff where he seems to be fine. Last year, there, all these Republicans in private said he's fine. But ultimately the media cycle has not died down from that situation because any gaffe that happens is going to be disproportionate, right? Because it's not like he's not the only one making these gaffes, but it's disproportionate. He did these town halls last year, but now he's back at the same position. So ultimately the media cycle has not given Biden an incentive to do these interviews until later in the year, because last year proved that it didn't get dispelled. It kind of the news cycle on his age died down a bit, and then it bumped back up. The smallest thing that happened, like he does an interview, does really well in it, quite clear and cogent. Lots of private leaks about Republicans saying, yeah, he outsmarted us. He knew how to do this and that. He's pretty easy to talk to. He runs laps around Ivy League college grads, things like that. But we've all forgotten about that, haven't we? We're just remembering
Well,
one thing that.
Anon, you've got to acknowledge that people are not convinced. And the answer isn't, well, they should be because he did an interview 2 years ago. The answer should be like, well, we'll put him out there again.
Yeah,
And
that's what I'm saying. That's
we're
what I'm
gonna
saying.
attack it head on. And
Yeah, what I'm
we're
saying
8
is
months till the general election.
what I'm saying is he needs to attack on closer to the election, because that's when you can get a calculus of Biden having more equal coverage with Trump. That's really the key here. Like it's not going to work if Biden is the only person all the time. It's only going to work when it's closer to the cycle, because clearly that's recency bias is a powerful effect. And even with all those failings, there is not a compelling case for any alternative. There's no, I mean, if Whitmer runs, that changes my calculus completely. But Dean
Well,
Phillips
you
does
won't
not.
know that. So the problem with your
But she's
proposal,
not running for a reason.
the
So
problem with your proposal, with respect, is that by waiting till the very end to reveal Biden, it'll be after the convention. It'll be too late. Now is the time, if we want to have a discussion about alternatives, it's before we make the official nomination.
right, but the problem is here is Whitmer's not going to run. That's it. Like
She
that's
won't run. She won't volunteer, but if he
no,
steps down, it's an open field.
yes, but what I'm saying here is I don't think the open field is going to work out the way you think it is, because the 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 Democratic tent is extremely large, and an open field I think has a big risk here, right?
What
Like
was
I
this?
would like calculus, but I'm still not sure that even if, let's say, other candidates run, it would still be the best choice to nominate them, because it's quite clear from like second choice polling that there is no cohesion within the Democratic Party's electorate on who the second choice is. The plurality is Kamala, everyone else is single digits, and this is despite the records of all these people. Like there's a clearly people are just there isn't, and Dean Phillips isn't even close to it, right? So
Yeah, that's
ultimately,
fine. I'm
what
going
I'm
to
saying,
concede that Phillips is a long shot. I'm more concerned about Biden losing to Trump.
right? Yes, that is my concern too. But what I'm saying is, all I can say here is there is it's ultimately just going to be a Trump versus Biden race. There isn't anything within these primaries or the electorates that suggests that there is a significant there is base defection. There isn't any electoral results either showing that. There's all, I mean, we remember like and there isn't a lot of polling. There isn't much polling that actually shows, like, if you do a Whitmer versus Trump or a Newsom versus Trump matchup, they perform pretty much the exact same as Biden, because there isn't any polling to really suggest that there's any nominee that actually overruns Biden. There's like a poll that I've pinned that like shows that Biden runs the exact same as generic Democrat presidential candidate. There, I
So,
I I honestly think we're in a situation, where our the way the public views the presidency is no longer what it used to be. I think it's turned kind of into how France views its presidency, inherently negative, fundamentally negative.
so
Like,
let's talk about what we all agree on, which is between September and November, there will be intense media scrutiny and coverage, and people will start paying attention.
correct.
There hopefully will be some, I think, 3 presidential debates, like 90 minutes each.
Mhm.
I would submit that the chances of a generic Democrat like a Whitmer or a Newsom or a Pritzker or a Buttigieg or a Klobuchar, the chances of them screwing up between September and November are less than the chances of Biden screwing up. Why? Because Biden was never a very skilled politician or candidate in the past.
No, he is. I mean, he's objectively a skilled politician. You cannot
Okay,
deny
he's not
that.
a skilled candidate. He was 5th in New Hampshire. He lost Iowa. It was only South Carolina, and then everybody dropped out. And he ran for president multiple times before unsuccessfully. He is a gaffe machine. So why are you so confident that a generic Democrat wouldn't do better than Biden in the
Because
fall?
there isn't any polling evidence right now to suggest that. And there isn't any polling evidence to show that the other candidates are the same. Because I honestly think what we're seeing here is we're having I see a Trump ceiling when it comes to the polls. It's always like 45,
Mhm.
47%. You never, you, and I like, you can, like, if you're talking, like, let's say, we can, a few months ago, there was the Florida HD 35 special election, right? In that election, we had more Republicans vote than Democrats, yet the Democrats won, right? So like there isn't, and this is despite the fact that the Republican candidate had a 5-to-1 fundraising advantage and ran Biden ads in the district constantly. That Republican candidate never, like, basically wanted to tie the Democrat candidate to Biden. Yet we had almost 70% of independents and this is hard to estimate because we can only get voter roll data, not voting intention data. So more Republican registered voters than Democrats had. And then the independents split between 60 to 80%, and Republicans split between 5 to 15% towards the Democratic candidate, who spent very little, and almost all the ad coverage in the area was about Biden. And yet that district was a DeSantis plus 12. So
right,
like there is electoral evidence to show that Biden does not inherently discourage persuasion in electoral results. Or, we're talking here, if you watched Virginia coverage like I had to deal with when it came to the 2020 thing, Biden, yet ultimately the governor did not lost his chambers. And the youth electorate turned at predicted rates. Democratic voters turned at predicted rates. There wasn't any lack. It was pretty expected results. So there isn't electoral evidence to suggest that what's happening in the polls is actually being driven into reality. Maybe there's a lot of Democratic voters that are concerned about Biden, but there's not, from the electoral, there's not many people that are actually like turning out less or so relative to predictions to kind of, it seems like, Biden isn't kind of seen as a negative driver here. There's a big difference between, like, it's also like Biden wins the majority of people who somewhat disapprove of him, and that's something that's never happened in polling. If we're going to kind of go follow the polling results, that's something that's really never happened before. So I think there's a lot of soft support, and this is actually what happens in France. There's Macron won the soft disapprovers by a significant margin. So and it's quite, I think we're seeing a different dynamic here, where people's perceptions of Biden, its age, are already baked in, and I honestly don't think an additional gaffe is actually going to hurt him at this point. Like, I honestly think it's just baked into the electorate, and ultimately, I do think if we're looking at election results, the persuasion factor among independents has been quite significant, especially since the Dobbs decision. There is a not insignificant defection that was seen, perhaps, it's not hard to say, in some of these special elections from Republicans to Democrats. And we have kind of districts of Trump Haley voters here, and so that's also a potential thing. So like electoral results haven't borne this out. Approval ratings have been at a quite have shown Biden winning soft disapprovers according to exit polls. We have also not a lot of evidence to show Trump actually Trump hasn't reached his ceiling. He may have reached his ceiling, and that's it. And everyone else is just going to consolidate around around Biden quite rapidly towards the election. Kind of what happened in 2022. All these polls showed big divergences with Republicans, but ultimately none of that happened. Dobbs went up. The polls had Republicans converging, but ultimately pretty poor midterm results from them relative to expectations. There isn't like a lot of data outside of polls that suggests Biden is uniquely weak, is actually weak amongst the electorate, at least in voting intention.
What's your interpretation of two trends in the polls that I've seen pretty consistently over the last few months? One trend is that while Biden is barely losing, maybe some polls he might even be winning by 1 or 2 points nationally, we all know that the president isn't chosen by a national kind of popular vote, that he is losing to Trump in almost all battleground states by sometimes 5, 6, 7 points.
So I mean, that point, the poll you're citing is Morning Consult. That's not that reliable. This is the same pollster that had Tate Reeves, the governor of Mississippi and one of the most unpopular politicians, like a Democrat, came within a point of beating this governor in Mississippi, and he has a positive approval rating. So like there is reason to be skeptical of how they sample these things, and also some of these margins don't like make sense. Like we're talking about Texas, you know, Biden wins Texas with Nikki Haley, which I don't believe. I think if Nikki Haley was the Republican nominee, Biden would be obliterated. Like the suburban shift would revert significantly. Yet Texas, whereas you can cite several polls that show Wisconsin winning Haley voters by 15 points, whereas Biden winning Texas if Haley runs. That's completely incompatible. You also have polls that show, Georgia being to the right of Texas. You also have, and Pennsylvania seems to be doing quite well for Biden. So has Wisconsin in some aspects too. There is a lot to kind of look at the polls. We're also seeing polls where we have the youth kind of almost 50-50, sometimes even favoring Trump, which does not compute with reality, to be frank. Also, there isn't any evidence to suggest that there's reversions with the black electorate. There's the black electorate's defecting to Trump, because no electoral evidence has shown that at all amongst kind of black populations in the elections of 2023. Yet we have these polls demonstrating that. And so that's what gives me big skepticism on how presidential polling operates. They were wrong I feel like, in 2016, they overestimated Hillary. In 2020, they overestimated Biden, and they keep correcting it, because ultimately it's also, the polling is not just they call a bunch of people. They have to do samples, they have to gather things. And how can you purely correct for one of my biggest skepticisms is the youth vote in these electorates, in these samples. I do not think you can avoid sampling bias, especially with young people who just do not respond to these kinds of polls. I do, and I honestly think the way they've adjusted their models may be an overcorrection, right? Right, we're looking at here, these kinds of things do not match up with the behavior. Like Pennsylvania being more red than Wisconsin kind of does not match the partisanship of the states in terms of their registration numbers, as well as their electoral compositions, as well as their their election results, right? This is Wisconsin, is the battleground of battlegrounds. I personally think this should be, like, if you're following the politics of these states, it does not make sense for Wisconsin to be to the left of, it doesn't make sense for Pennsylvania to be to the right of Wisconsin, or honestly Michigan either. Nevada also doesn't show that sign either. There's a lot of things to be skeptical in terms of how they sample swing state voting, because we're having black electorates in Pennsylvania, black electorates in Michigan and Nevada. Less white, you have less black electorates in Wisconsin, Hispanic. The one big difference between all these states and Wisconsin is the minority electorate. That's honestly the biggest difference between them. So that's my skepticism, is that I do not think minority votes are being sampled correctly.
So I was just wanted to call out that it's not just the morning consult poll. This one's from New York Times, Siena.
That's correct.
This has the highest rating on 537 for polling historic accuracy.
But it was also pretty inaccurate in 2020. So or at least I can say the aggregate polling was inaccurate.
The aggregate polling, yeah, okay. I'll let the folks kind of fact check us. How off was the New York Times Siena polling in 2020? But regardless, let me try and summarize, because I know I promised you I'd keep it to 30 minutes. But it's
go a little bit longer.
I appreciate it. Yeah, and if anybody has questions in the comments, I've seen a couple questions. We'll get to the chat questions for me or Anon in a minute. If I had to summarize, just to make sure I understand where you're coming from, Anon, I think what I'm hearing is, hey, Biden has a great record to run on. 2, Biden will be more accessible, but there's an intentional strategy here to do it when the kind of attention will have the most impact on the election, and doing it too early doesn't get him any benefit, and there'll be more attention to the gaffes and the actual event or interview or whatever. And that if it's not Biden, it's certainly not going to be Dean, and no one else is running. So
Yeah, you're stuck with him. So might as
this
well ride with him.
car that we're going to go on the road trip.
I mean, the simplest explanation for the detractors is Biden is going to win. Better to ride with him, support him, and just push with him than to worry about the alternative. Like, I mean, I'm not necessarily going to persuade you by my arguments, right? Like, you're probably, more trusting of the polling than I am. I probably rely more on election results and special election data, and kind of, and I honestly like fundraising advantages as well as kind of the mechanisms and politics of what's going on in these swing states, because you also have to consider domestic politics is a big factor here. Like we're talking about, Michigan GOP kicking each other in the balls, Arizona reps biting each other in the ear. We're also talking about institutional advantages Democrats have in these places that would really advantage them. But I'm not necessarily going to convince you here. But what I'm going to say is it's going to be Biden, and I think even the biggest detractors acknowledge that. And I honestly think it's just more productive just to ride with him than to focus on criticizing him, because just being a hype man can actually drive a lot of things, right? Because all these, I mean, maybe it's a little bit callous to compare, but Republicans just hype Trump to no end. They suck him off like he's absolutely an insane person. But honestly, they stick with him to no end, and that's honestly been rewarded with them, right? So whereas everyone just rides with Biden, honestly, like fake it till you make it with the detractors, that's actually kind of a real thing. People didn't like Biden in 2020, but yet they all just went for Democrats anyway. And they were unhappy with Democrats on the economy. Yet they still went with Democrats in a lot of swing states, blue waves in some of these. So I just think it just makes sense to just hype him up, because sometimes you can drive a media narrative. I know we joke, but there's this guy, Will Stancil, who just kept nagging journalists constantly about the economy. And you can actually see the economic sentiment coverage in these newspapers like go up a bit. So maybe all the Will Stancil like harassing all these reporters kind of drove up media coverage, and that's been reflected in consumer sentiment indicators. So sometimes faking it till you make it can work, and that's honestly what happened with Trump, right? Like he's fake as crap, but all these Republicans hype him up and everything, and it seems to have worked a little bit. So I think if even the detractors hype up Biden, that evens will show up. But at the same time, I also do harbor skepticism about the polls in general and also the ceilings of it. I know I'm being a bit rambly here, but I just think if you hype Biden up, it'll show up in the elections.
All right. All right. Let's hit some questions from the audience, and then we'll wrap up, Anon. It's been a pleasure having you on, and I think we come at this with different perspectives, but we want the same outcome in November. So I'm glad that you agreed to come on. And would you mind taking a couple of audience questions?
Yeah, sure. Just let me know how to do that.
Yeah, I'm gonna read them out to you. I think you kind of answered this. Do you think Dean is a threat to Biden?
I mean, honestly, kind of my vibe. I mean, this is totally vibes based, but I think, despite my criticisms of Dean, I honestly think Dean is probably doing a better job at consolidating the Democratic base than anticipated. Like, I think a lot of base voters who are unenthused about Biden are so a little bit admittedly turned off by Dean that they're kind of hyping up Biden, even though they were more ambivalent about Biden in the past. Like you can clearly see the vibe shift, like where people are like, whatever, Dean is this. And then as Dean kind of talked more and more and attacked the president more and more, people went from being like, well, I'm supporting Biden no matter what, to like, what are you doing? So I honestly think in a way, Dean is kind of consolidating and inadvertently hyping up Biden amongst the electorate.
Well, that's great, and that's then
So that is true.
for him to
Um,
say.
I honestly think it's just better if he drops out, but I don't think it's going to hurt him. There are far bigger concerns than that. That's true. Dean isn't going to hurt Biden at all. I just personally think it's a bit annoying, and I think it's just better for Dean supporters just to hype on with Biden and hype him up because I think that's better. But Dean isn't going to hurt Biden's approvals or anything. I think it's going to keep him neutral. I guess he's not actually splitting the coalition. To be frank, here
Yeah.
there's nothing I can see that he's an actual threat.
And I think a lot of people, I can only speak for myself. I would be more inclined to hype up Biden if I had a little bit more visibility into his readiness. That's why I was so disappointed that he did turn down the Super Bowl Sunday interview, because that could have been a good moment for all of us to be like, you know what? The car's a little older, but like there's enough here. Like, it's the
Yeah,
engine's
I mean,
smoking.
my suspicion is that he just couldn't make the time, just based on how much reception our nonprofit, I'll say, is getting with the administration.
You
Less so
don't
with
think
Congress, less so with Congress, which is why I'm making that. I actually don't know. What I'm saying is we're talking more with Congress than we are with the administration, whereas it's less so in prior months. So I just suspect there's something there that's like a scheduling thing. Maybe I'm wrong. I could totally be wrong. Maybe
you don't
it's
think the 60 Minutes would have agreed to a pre-recorded interview at a time and day of his choosing, and then just aired it before the Super Bowl?
I mean, I suspect he's probably. I mean, to be frank, what's might happen is Biden is kind of waiting for a time to probably go for like town halls on that are with journalists that are more favored to him. To be frank, I
Hmm.
think he's waiting for that kind of opportunity because I don't think the average person cares where the source of the town hall is coming from. So it advantages Biden to wait for like an MSNBC type or something like that, or Joe or something like that. So I think he's prepping for that, but I just don't think it's time. So he's it's quite clear that Biden is hostile to the media with some, and I think it's somewhat warranted. Um, I mean, I'm not saying he should be like super combative, but there is a back and forth that's been happening for a couple of years.
Mm.
Like I know a couple of journalists who are like, and I can tell like some of these journalists are frustrated that they're not getting that many interviews compared to the Trump administration, because I know several people who's lost big money on their books because Biden does not sell at all. There is a
Mm.
reason why journalism is in a rut despite an objectively good economy. It's like one of the few industries performing poorly, and there's a reason for that. Um, so there is if you know the Beltway press, there is a bit of angst that they don't get enough interviews. They don't get enough like chats with him, whereas Biden is very selective in how he engages with the public, very like business-like. And so I mean, I'm not here to defend him wholly here, but there you can, if you know the Beltway press, they do have a bit of a sense of entitlement that you don't see with other journalistic groups across the country.
All right. Next question is from Entropy. What does it say about Biden that he doesn't feel like stepping down? Surely that's some information we need to consider.
Yeah, that's true. I personally would have preferred Biden step down. But I think kind of that what happened is the midterms were pretty good for Biden. So the conclusion that most of the Democratic establishment, as well as Biden himself, concluded that, clearly I'm not turning off any voters. I mean, not really. Like the midterms didn't show that people actually hate Biden or the Democratic Party. So I think his conclusion was, I'm the tried and tested candidate. So maybe there's a bit of an ego thing here. I would have preferred he step down, but the midterms kind of killed that. If Biden got if Democrats did badly in the midterms, I honestly think we would be having a competitive primary right now. I think
Hmm.
that's the main thing. The overperformance of the Democrats in the midterms killed any need for competition, And I think Biden concluded, you know what, I'm going to run with it. He didn't see any signs in the election that he shouldn't run, right? Only the elections were telling him, hey, it's fine, you can still run. You know, the soft, I'm not that happy with you, but I'll vote for you anyway. And that was good enough for him. I honestly think that's the main reason why he didn't step down, or there was no pressure to step down from the party establishment. The midterms, I killed it permanently.
So, Anon, I managed to find, remember we were not
Yeah.
sure if the New York Times Siena poll is any good for 2020. So I managed to find a December 2019 poll that showed that Biden would barely win some key battleground states by just a hair.
Mm-hmm.
So I think they were not predicting like a massive Trump win.
Yeah, but I personally, yeah, but at the same time, a lot of these polls also showed kind of interesting deficits in. I mean, the polls were ultimately accurate on the top line, but I think the down ballot data has degraded more in the last couple of years. That's just my opinion, just based on what I'm seeing, like kind of with minority voters and stuff, and kind of the collapse of the youth response rates. So, you know, maybe the top lines are still right, but I still think kind of the much more the way weirder crosstabs and data is a big sense of skepticism. Even in the New York Times Siena polls, there's some pretty bizarre crosstabs. So there, I feel like there's some degradation with certain parts of like I think it's really hard to reach youth voters, and I think it's only gotten harder as TikTok has exponentiated. Apple as robocalls get cracked down a lot more. It's so you get really wishy-washy things. I'm more skeptical of the polls than most, perhaps, but yeah.
So speaking of crosstabs, Vaughn's position is, hey, I'm worried about suburban whites not coming out for Biden this time. I mean, that was a constituency that was very important for Biden, especially in some of these swing states.
I mean, if we're going to go with the polls, that's probably the constituency he's doing better with.
Mm-hmm.
And also, the suburban whites have been the most that have been zooming to Republican. Like like the election results have shown that actually the suburban whites have been persuaded a lot more. Like the Florida district, kind of a suburban district, a plurality Republican district too. Massive persuasion here. I have, in fact, like suburban whites, have been really like from everything you hear. It's just abortion is a serious killer for the GOP, and just weird stuff. The GOP being weird has been the driver of the suburban shift amongst suburban whites, and abortion's salience as it rises is going to be a key driver in terms of people kind of coming to Biden, kind of returning to Biden when they're being ambivalent. I think people really underestimate just how potent abortion is amongst the suburban electorate, especially suburban whites and especially women, right? Because abortion is not just like an abortion; it's viewed as like a civil rights kind of thing, like women's rights. And I think if you see the vitriol that's kind of happened, like that's I think people are really underestimating that thing. So I honestly don't see the suburban whites shifting back or turning out lower just because of how salient abortion is in a lot of these states and the abortion referendums that are being positioned all over the place. And you're also talking about most of these states have governors that are quite popular by all metrics, Democratic governors too. And I don't think you should undercount the power of surrogacy when it comes to these states. Like Whitmer is very popular. Hobbs is doing decently well. Evers is pulling some good moves in the Wisconsin legislature. Josh Shapiro is fiendishly popular.
Mm-hmm.
There's and then there's abortion going to be on the ballot in Florida. So there's a lot of saliency and salient issues that I think aren't being discussed, that have kind of been in the back burner for a while. And I think abortion is like the biggest gift on Dobbs' decision is the biggest gift to Democrats, honestly. And I don't think it's going away. It's not
Yeah,
even
I
diminishing
agree with
slightly.
you that abortion is a strong motivator for people to vote for whoever is on the Democratic ticket, even if it's Biden. I will say that I've noticed a key constituency, the voters of color, young voters of color, seem to have different opinions about Netanyahu than Biden does. Do you think the ceasefire calls will diminish to
Yeah,
potential
that's
for Biden?
that's a thing. I'm like, it's hard to say um because that is a concern. I we don't know to the extent, right? Like, this is going to, I mean, this is something, will it turn off significant amounts of voters of color, of young voters of color specifically?
Mm-hmm.
Uh, so it's that's an untested question, and I do agree, kind of what you posted prior, that Michigan would be a good test ground for this. I mean, it's the Arab communities. It's a permanent defection. It's just not they're not going to vote for Biden. Never going to happen. That's it. Done. But the test case is kind of like in college campuses and things like that in Michigan on how it's doing. College campuses in like South Carolina and New Hampshire haven't shown any evidence, but Michigan may be a better indicator. So that it's an untested question, but also I think Biden is also at kind of a awkward situation here, because we're also talking about, if Biden goes too hard in one way, maybe not, it's not guaranteed, like, he'll be alienating significant amounts of young voters from showing up, or especially young voters of color from showing up, Arab Americans. But if he also goes kind of the other way, you're also talking about the Jewish electorate, which is absolutely key in Pennsylvania and key to retaining Congress in New York. So Biden is kind of at a coalition split issue, and I honestly, and Biden doesn't like Netanyahu, but I think his calculation is just he doesn't want to I think his point. I think what he wants to do with Netanyahu is like not alienate the Israeli population too much. Biden wants to remain popular with the Israeli population, so he has as much political capital to push Netanyahu. But if he goes too aggressive against Netanyahu wants those voters to come back to him, and then he retains power after this is over. So there's a calculation here, but I think from the domestic situation, we're talking about a coalition splitting situation here. We have Jewish electorate, and then we have maybe the young voters of color. But the untested question is, will these voters actually like revert either by staying home or switching parties even? That is an untested question. Honestly, have no answer to that. The only thing we can guess is the primary electorate. That's really all we can do before the general. So like, it is a concern to me, but I just don't know how we can actually measure it. Except I'm not even sure Michigan can measure it accurately either. So it's just something we just kind of have to ride on, because I don't think Dean is going to compel the young voters either. Whereas I just don't think Biden and Dean differ enough on that issue to divert. And I honestly don't think any Democratic candidate diverts enough on that issue. I don't think there's like Whitmer or Newsom or any of those candidates would differ significantly on it. Ironically, Kamala is probably has the most cred here, when
Yeah,
it comes
yeah,
to.
yeah. That's a good point.
So
That's it.
so 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 that's also the sort of thing, as a person of color, as
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. All right,
so there's also that.
Last question, then we'll wrap up. And on this has been great. Thank you again. Is there a risk of repeating past mistakes? Hillary was the wrong candidate, and the Democrats wanted to play it safe. And going that way again might hand the election to Trump. I guess maybe I would also frame it as, do you think 2024 will look more like 2016 or 2020? Because in 2016, obviously we lost.
Mhm.
But 2020, a lot of people held their nose and were like, look, I just don't want Trump. And they got on the Biden train, and he eked out a victory by 45,000 votes, but he still won.
Yeah.
Uh,
So ultimately, I don't think it's going to be like 2016. I think it'll be quite similar to 2020. Voters are just going to realize it's Biden versus Trump again. Here we go again. I'm going to hold my nose again. You're stuck with it. That's the honest truth. Um, and also important thing is I really just don't see. I don't think I don't think people hate Biden as much as Hillary. I think people are like just like a lot of people are like very disappointed on Biden, but no one hates Biden really. There's not that except Republicans. People are like, oh, you're an old man, um, but so I don't think it'll be like that. And also a big difference is the party infrastructure down ballot is far stronger in 2024 than it was in 2016. Like Democrats control down ballots in these swing states. Like we have a Democratic governor of North Carolina. We have with Michigan as a trifecta. Wisconsin's on the verge of fair maps. Pennsylvania had a blue wave in 2023. Arizona had a Dem governor, and the abortion issue is going to be on the ballot, and the Arizona GOP is in shambles. So there's also the persuasion and the infrastructure argument too, right? The Biden isn't just Biden, right? Like he has a whole apparatus on him, and that's something that's a lot stronger in 2024. And the GOP, if you're looking at the financial data, if you're looking how their get out the vote operations are going, all of that is not showing really good signs for them. So there's also a big institutional difference too. And honestly, like I don't think Biden can never be as hated as Hillary was, and that's also a big difference. Like he's the grandpa effect does have some benefits, I think, but that's I mean it's an untested question, but I just think it makes sense to just stick with Biden because we're getting Biden, and if we're all backing Biden, we'll win. If everyone's on board with Biden, if we're hyping it up, whether we believe it inside or not, it'll help. If you're all getting out the vote, telling people to vote Democrat, that's what kind of matters most, So that's something I think Hillary had a lot less kind of party institutional support actually, even although not a lot of people actually don't believe it. The DNC is probably one of the weakest party infrastructures in the entire world. People really don't realize that the parties in the U.S. are actually pretty weak. Like there isn't the levers of power. Like Hillary did win the primary electorate. There wasn't like rigging or anything. And if you want rigging, like we're talking Canada or France, like there to some extent you have to acknowledge that like the primary electorate is sticking with Biden for the most part. There isn't any signs. I honestly don't think it'll change much in Michigan either. Maybe there'll be like a few percentage points for uncommitted extra. So we're kind of stuck with, so I think we should just hype him up, help him out, and then criticize him all you want after 2024.
All right. Well, let's end with one fun question. Predictions on Michigan primary results. I think Biden won South Carolina by 96%. Nevada, probably like 99%. I don't know. What do you think he's going to do in Michigan?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think I don't want to say. I mean, I'll think about it. I don't want to do the math. I always forget about math, but like I want to think about it in terms of the uncommitted vote. Just because of the demographics of the state, I'm going to suspect like he'll get the uncommitted will get like 10 to 13%. That's my prediction, just by the demographics of the state. But just the question is like, what the question we should be observing in that is also what the suburbs do, like what the Haley voters, where the Haley voters are too. That's also important to note too. We all should also consider that there's a lot of Democrats who are registering for Republican primaries to kind of vote in Haley out of spite. So I think that's my prediction. So subtract that number minus like 2% or less for Dean. And that's kind of Biden's margin.
So 85 for Biden maybe or something like that?
Yeah, something like that, because I think he'll still perform quite strongly with the black electorate, which is substantial in the state too. So that's
And
also worth
would you be
considering.
happy with that outcome?
Yeah,
That
I would be.
of a swing
I would
state
be.
voted
Yeah.
against him?
I mean, it's not out of the ordinary. Biden, Obama, there are some states in the 2012 primary that Obama did significantly worsen for certain reasons. Um, and so, yeah, that would be an acceptable result, 80%. That's quite similar to what Obama got in 2012. Uh,
Wow. So if one out of every four,
every five.
every five said, no, I'm not comfortable with Biden, and this is Michigan, a swing state, that would be a good outcome. We should be excited about this.
That wouldn't be just based on how primary votes work. That's not wouldn't be out of the outcome. I would expect more like 85 or higher,
Mhm.
honestly. Um, that's my prediction, 15% defection. But ultimately, you also have to consider, there's a difference between, a good chunk of those uncommitted voters are just going to revert back to Biden anyway. And the unique demographics of Michigan, that is a concern. It's an untested question. But if you see primary elections, bad performances, or not bad performances, but like getting into the 80s is not unusual in uncompetitive primaries, because you can also make the same exact argument to Trump.
Mm-hmm.
Like, are these Haley voter? I mean, you could argue like, those Haley voters are more likely to vote for Biden than Biden defectors are going to vote for Trump. So that's a turnout differential too, because a Haley to Biden voter is is twice as strong as a Biden to abstain at home voter, because you're not going to get Biden to Trump voters, in my opinion, not by a significant margin. That's my personal perception, just based on just how Trump is. I think people know who he is, and people will be reminded of it, and they'll stop saying undecided or uncommitted or RFK Jr. in these vote shares.
Okay, so I did look it up, and Obama got 89% of Michigan in 2012.
Mm-hmm.
I would argue that given that Biden supporters were all very clear that the South Carolina outcome was so obviously a Biden victory, and what he did in Nevada, that
I would
if
expect 85% just because of the Arab vote.
yeah, I got you. I'm going to say if Biden gets over 95%, like any Dean supporter should probably get ready to ride with Biden. If Biden gets between 85 and 95, I think there's still an argument to be made.
But
And
that's but Obama got like 89. That's within that same
yeah,
point there,
yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah, I agree. So I'm not saying
I
that.
just don't think 85 versus 89 is a big sign of anything, personally.
Yeah, I was
That's,
saying if he gets 95 or above, it's done. If it's from 85 to 95, there's a discussion to be had. If he gets under 85, like that's a real problem for the Biden camp. That's a real problem. Like he's a sitting president.
mm-hmm. Yeah, that might be fair.
That's so. Well, let's see what happens in Michigan, and hopefully people participate. And if everybody like rallies behind Biden, and it's like a clear 3 victories in a row, then I think even I myself would say like, look, I wish there were other options, but this train is picking up speed. So let's just hold on for dear life, and maybe we'll squeak out a victory again, like we did last time.
I mean, you'll have to do it again no matter what happens. You're
Anon,
stuck with
thanks.
it.
Hey,
If
thanks
you
for
hate him
coming
or
on.
not, you are stuck with him. Like, if you hate him, you are stuck with Biden. There's nothing that's going to change.
Yeah,
Uh,
you're
we
like, hey,
can't. We
Tom,
can't.
you're already on the train. You just don't know
Yeah,
it.
yeah. I mean, I've accepted I'm on this ride, and I will run off the cliff with it, because
Oh my
the
God.
other opportunity is just getting drone strike by Trump. So like,
Yeah.
um, so you're stuck with it, and I just think what you're gonna do, because I don't thinking about the past. Biden is here. It's Biden versus Trump. The copium has ended, so it's just time to to just go with Biden and stop Trump, because that's the only vehicle we have. There's no other vehicle that nothing's going to change it. Literally nothing. So I think it's pointless. But I do think, Dean isn't going to hurt anything. So I don't care too much if he's running. He is a bit annoying in my opinion. But I do think I expect some good results from Michigan. I'm optimistic. I don't think the uncommitted crowd is going to be that substantial outside of the Arab and college towns, and Biden will do quite well in the suburbs, and Haley will do extremely well in the suburbs, and I think that shows a good sign of a path for Biden, because the suburbs are super important. So that's my vision.
Yes, thank you for coming on.
And it's always good to be optimistic because you'll be happier that way too.
Yeah, for sure. And I also appreciate you taking the time. I know a lot of the people that I said, hey, they were kind of very anti-Dean. And I said, look, let's just come on and have a live discussion. They were suggesting that, oh, this is a trap. You won't let the other person talk. You're just going to scream at them. And I hope you did not feel like this was a...
No. I mean, I knew like there's going to be a bit of tension here, but it's all good. I mean, I wasn't expecting to change anyone's opinion, but I'm just making the case of just ride the train and just go with it. And I mean, honestly, from my perspective, I mean, it's true. I do have also a career incentive to support Biden, because I think Biden is way better to deal with in terms of getting good work done for what I'd like to say my community than Obama ever was, or anything. And so I also just like Biden. He's delivered for me, and so I have a big incentive to support him. That's true. But I honestly think there's a lot of things that he's doing right now or past that's going to be quite rewarded. Like Biden has accomplished a lot, and I think there is some, he should be kind of. I mean, he should get some credit for that. He did stuff Obama could never do, like with a 50-50 Senate. And I think there should be some acknowledgement that he should kind of get a bit of rewards for it.
He will get. I think he will get. I mean, he would have guaranteed an amazing legacy if he had decided not to run for re-election and just had his first term be his final chapter in politics. And depending on the outcome, if he gets the nomination, and depending on the outcome in November, his legacy will be either reinforced, or his legacy will be that he lost to Trump.
Yeah, we'll have to find out. But for now, I'll believe in Dark Brandon.
I love it. Thanks, Anon. Take care, buddy.
Take care.
All right. That was interesting. It's always good to have kind of an exchange of views. And if there are other Biden supporters that want to come on to the show, it's kind of an open invitation, or Trump supporters, frankly, because I kind of feel like I'm not in either of those camps right now. And definitely we'll have to see what happens in Michigan. Personally, I think if Biden has over 95%, if he has a similar outcome in Michigan as he did in South Carolina, where everybody was saying South Carolina was such clear evidence that he should be the nominee, and if we repeat that in Michigan, then that'll be a pretty strong case. At the same time, if 10-15% of people say they don't want Biden in the Democratic primary in a key swing state, I don't think the Biden supporters can make the argument that is such a slam dunk that Biden should be the nominee. And certainly, if Biden doesn't get over 85% in Michigan, I think that really will only raise more questions about his readiness to win in November. If you found this conversation useful, do me a solid and like and share. It really helps the channel grow. And then let me know in the comments what you think. Do you feel like you were convinced by Anon, or where did you agree with him or me, or do you have a third perspective that we didn't consider? And let me know, because I read all the comments and reply to most of them. I also want to thank our members. If you're watching this on YouTube, you can click the join link and help me pay for the cost of the streaming software and podcast hosting fees. And if you listen to audio podcasts, just search for Nerds for Humanity wherever you listen to podcasts, and you can hear me in the car or hear my guests as you're doing dishes or going for a walk. Our biggest supporter to help defray the costs of this channel are Soldier One, the Senior Vice President. Thank you, Soldier One. Next up are Kristen Slevin and Bike. Thank you, Kristen Slevin and Bike, Vice President level. Then we have our hardcore, Gene, David, DK, Jekalego, Mr. History, Mona, Vaughn, Yang, Dean, Galessa, Jay Perrin, Dana, Jason, Daniel, Mickey, Yoda, and Unkiyu. And then at our entry level, verified, only $1.99 a month. You can see them on the screen right here. So thanks to all our members. You guys make this content possible and help keep the channel going. So with that, I'm going to say goodbye, nerds. Oh, we forgot the going away music. Gosh darn it. Here we go. Okay, so here are my takeaways from the conversation. Bonus content. Number one, the argument that Biden is what you're going to get is very pragmatic, and I understand the logic behind it. I also believe that you have a primary process for a reason. The convention isn't until August. Super Tuesday hasn't happened yet. If we're going to change cars, like, now's the time to either change cars, or if we're going to keep the same car, now's the time to take it on a test drive and do that 10-point inspection before we go on this long road trip to November together. And frankly, it's a road trip for the next 4 years. So keep that in mind. So ultimately, Biden has an opportunity to go down in history as one of the greats who beat Trump and had an amazing 4 years. Yes, he also has an opportunity to go down in history as beating Trump twice and then maybe having like an amazing second term. That is a possibility. There is another possibility that Biden will go down in history as promising to be a transitional president, getting a lot done in his first term, and then refusing to step down in spite of clear data suggesting that he would lose key swing states in the most trusted poll out there, which is the New York Times Siena poll, which was accurate in 2020 as well, and giving us another 4 years of a disastrous Trump administration. I suppose there's a fourth scenario, which is Biden beats Trump, has a good first term, loses to Trump, and then Trump does a good job from 2024 to 28. Like, let's be honest, like, I guess in the spirit of mathematical possibilities, that's one of them. I don't know if I would assign a high probability to it, but it is. So yeah, regardless, if Biden's gonna be our nominee, I think if you set aside the whole Dean versus Biden thing, which obviously is important, but if you set it aside and you said, like, well, what if I wanted Biden to be the nominee and to win in November? He has to get out, in my opinion, he has to come out of his sequestration. Like, he is encapsulated in styrofoam, bubble wrap, like 5 velvet rings of protection to then, do a 5-10 minute press conference where frankly he loses it, or do like a 10-15 minute prepared speech where he's off the prompter and he seems like not super connected to the audience and misunderstands when they're chanting for him, or interrupts them where they're chatting for him, where he's like, no, I'm serious, no. And it's just it's not confidence inspiring. And to quote Sam Grote, who was on the channel last week, a candidate needs to earn trust. And I'll ask you all, do you think Biden is doing a good job earning the trust of independents, suburban swing state voters, young voters, voters of color? Because he needs all of them to win. Remember, he barely won last time. Remember the day after the election, nobody knew who won. It was so close. So don't assume that Biden's just going to like have an automatic win because he won last time, because he barely won last time. It's like if the Seahawks and the Patriots replayed Super Bowl 49, a month later, are you sure the Patriots would have won, or would we have given it to Marshawn? So sorry for the tangent there, but it is Super Bowl weekend, so I had to put a football reference in there. Let me know what you think in the comments. We'll see you guys later. Take care. Bye now.